My name is Linda Hopkins. I live in Washington, D.C., and I am so happy to be here at Dwayne's invitation. I'm happy to be here because basically my life's work has been to study a man who is a Pakistani man. He's your person, not mine, and you know a lot of things I don't know about him, or you would if you researched him. I'm going to start. I'm going to just go start with a PowerPoint and summarize Masud Khan's life in the West, where he lived most of his life, from age 22 to age 67 in London. But although he always had a presence in Pakistan, um, I'm going to start with a PowerPoint to summarize things, and then I'm going to go back and tell you more about his Western life, and then I'm going to talk about his Eastern life, which is a topic of which I do not feel like I'm an expert. And I hope that some of you will become experts and tell me things. Okay, Dwayne, let's start this PowerPoint.
Okay.
Masud Khan, one of the most famous analysts, one of the most gifted psychoanalysts in the West. He lived in 1924 to 1989. And this is a picture I particularly like of him. One of the things about it is that he's got that cigarette in his mouth. He always had a cigarette in his mouth. And I wanted to use this as the cover of my biography of him, but my editors wouldn't let me because they thought it promoted smoking, but I thought that was ridiculous. But anyway, I couldn't use it. Anyway, I like this picture. This is him as an adult, of course. He came over to London at age 22. Okay, next. You can just read this. Andre Green is a really famous French analyst. No one can deny Massoud's talent, but it is also impossible to deny his sickness as in his evil nature. When you have met someone like him, you know that the mind is not simple. It may not be true that he was sick and evil. This is something that the Eastern story has to be told. This is how it ended up in the West, where he was considered sick and evil in England and in the United States, not necessarily elsewhere. It's a long, complicated story, but this is a good quote about about how Western people view him. Okay, next one. This is Masud Khan in Pakistan. He was first He was born in Jhelum. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And lived his early years in Montgomery before he moved to Lyallpur, Pakistan. He was from a very wealthy family that moved in the British world there. And you can see he's pretty much dressed in Western style. I think he's about 7 years old there, or 8. Okay, next. This is his family. And it's just noteworthy if you read his history that woman, in the top right-hand corner, the dark-skinned woman, that's his sister, who died at a young age, and that had a big impact on him. Those are his half sisters because his father had 4 wives, so he had 12 half siblings. Okay, this is Masud Khan when he first came to London. I think it's in London. It could be in Pakistan, but I think it's in London. He was really thin. He didn't always stay that thin, but he never got fat. Okay, this is definitely in London. He had been a lover of horse riding in India, where before it became Pakistan, and he rode horses in London in the public park, and he had a horse. He loved horses. Okay. This is his first wife. Masud Khan's mother was a Masud Khan's father was in his 70s and his mother was 17 when they got married. She was a courtesan and she gave him three kids. Masud Khan was the second son. And Masud Khan had two wives. So his mother was like a dancer, if I'm saying that right. I may be saying everything wrong because I don't know your world very well. But anyway, he always married in the West white women who were dancers. And this was his first wife. She was a dancer, Jane Shore. Okay, this is Jane Shore. Okay, this is his wedding to Jane Shore. And this is on the left is his brother Tahir. His date was a Hindu woman from India named, I think her name is Prem Bindra. She became kind of important in India. She founded Life magazine in India. And on the right is his wife to be, Jane Shore, and she was wearing, I may not pronounce this right, a Karakuli Afghan hat, which Masud also wore a lot, often. So they're on the way to the church. Okay. Then, after 3 or 4 years of marriage to Masud Khan, Jane Shore had a nervous breakdown, and she ended up in treatment. If you've studied analysis, you know that Donald Winnicott is one of the most famous analysts in 50 years. In the oh no, one of the most famous analysts of all time. And she had a nervous breakdown and ended up in analysis with Donald Winnicott, and they got divorced. Donald Winnicott was Masud Khan's analyst and the person who was his mentor. And Masud Khan, I'm going to talk about this later, but he served Donald Winnicott throughout his life, which is a very, very big deal. But anyway, this is Jane Shore having a breakdown, and she said it was okay for me to share this picture. She's still alive. Okay,
Wow.
she turned out okay. This is Masud Khan with, I don't know if you know these people very well, but in the golden age of psychoanalysis, which I would say in the West was in the 1960s, two of the greats were the second from the left is a man named Charles Rycroft, and the woman who's the third from the left is Marion Milner, and that's Masud Khan. Um, in in um, in his first 10 years in London. I don't know why he's standing like that. And if you have an idea, send me an email. I'd like to know what you think. Okay, here he is with Charles Rycroft, who was his roommate for a while. Rycroft's a pretty important person in the West, long dead, actually. Okay. Okay, this is Masud Khan's second wife and the love of his life, Svetlana Beryosova. She was a dancer also, but she wasn't just like, well, Jane Shore was in the Royal Ballet, and she was like a mouse in Cinderella. Svetlana Beryosova was like Cinderella. She was for a while the top ballerina at the Royal Ballet. She devoted her life to ballet. She's somewhat famous in the ballet world. She was more famous than Masud Khan at this point when they got married in 1962, but they were pretty deeply in love. And although they ended up divorced, they loved each other the most throughout their lives and never were okay after they got divorced. They missed each other and still saw each other some, but they both had tragic endings to their life, which I'll tell you a little bit about. But anyway, I love this picture. They look pretty happy to me. I think it's in Monte Carlo. Okay, this is his wedding. He's wearing that Karakuli hat, and that's her there. And that wedding was on national TV. It was a big deal, mostly because of her. Okay, so Barry Cooper. This is Masud Khan's doctor and his friend. Masud Khan had a particularly rare gift for catalyzing. He wanted something to happen with you and him because, as he would say, how else can I know I'm alive? One thing about Masud is he was never boring. He was a fascinating, fascinating man, and he had a lot of friends who loved being with him. Barry Cooper was one of them. Okay. This is where they lived in London. If you've been to London, you'll recognize that the building on the right is Harrods department store, which is, you see the Harrods. It's one of the top department stores in London. They lived in the building across the street, and he worked in that from that building, and it was a very prestigious building. The actor Michael Redgrave lived there with his family. Lynn Redgrave, the Redgrave family, Vanessa Redgrave were the daughters. Um, he moved in that world, living there with Svetlana, a huge flat across the street from Harrods. Okay, this is Masud Khan's, the people he hung out with in that flat. On the left is Mike Nichols. I have no idea if you know who these people are. Mike Nichols is a really famous film producer. In the middle is Rudolf Nureyev, the dancer who defected from Russia. And on the right is Julie Andrews. That was Masud Khan's world, these very important people in the West. Okay. This is Masud Khan with Julie Andrews, who's pregnant. She was best friend of his wife. Okay, Dwayne. This is Svetlana Beryosova. Not bad, huh? She's on note that although her legs are stretched, she's on point. She was quite the dancer. Okay. Here she is again. Okay. Here she is again. Okay. Here she is again. This is a picture by Henri Cartier-Bresson, who in the West is a very famous photographer. This was on the cover of our Look magazine had an article, had a whole issue devoted to her, and this was on the cover. Okay. So Masud Khan said this about himself. This might give you a little bit of knowing how complicated he was. Sometimes I feel like I'm one of the Indian gods with two heads, six arms, four legs. If I were less endowed, perhaps I could be more containable. He knew he wasn't containable. He was too big a personality. In a strange way, I dread my efficiency. It could consume me. He was afraid of his own mind because it was so large. Okay. The next one. Svetlana again. That's just a picture I happen to like. Okay. And this is, they happen to like dogs a lot. So this is them with their little dog. By the way, and then you see the cigarette in his mouth. I never met Masud. He died before I started my project, but I did meet Svetlana. She was in a wheelchair, but she had more grace and physical ability to go from a couch to a wheelchair to a chair or whatever than anybody I've ever seen. She was obviously magnificent still, even at that state. Okay. Vladimir Granov is an important French analyst. He was not a Lacanian, um, but he was with the other group. And he says, I got to know him pretty well in my research. What hardly anyone knows is that Masud made Winnicott. He edited, indexed, and printed him. Winnicott is a colossal figure now due to Masud. Shows Masud's influence in making Winnicott a popular figure is a big, big deal. Okay. Masud's best friend in the West, best friends were Robert and Sybil Stoller from California. Robert, a psychoanalyst who writes about sexual perversion, no longer alive. But they were like guardian angels to Masud. He would visit them, and they watched out for him his whole life. Okay, someone should write a book about them. Um, this is one of his lovers, um, who he's criticized for having lovers. He wasn't exactly a womanizer. He was one woman at a time, but he had a lot of, or 6 or 7 women who he was in sexual and pretty close relationships, and she was one of them. I interviewed all of them, I think. The time with Khan was the best period of my life. How many people do you know who can say they were in a totally satisfying emotional relationship? So he was exceptional not only as a psychoanalyst, but as a lover. As a lover, according to all those women, said he was exceptional as a lover. Okay. And this is his friend. And this is a topic that is really what I want to talk about today, but I'm not going to have time to say enough about it. Masud had a problem in London. He was never Europeanized. You're either Europeanized or not. He was an he was from India, Pakistan. He was not from the West. That's what she's talking about. He never was. Okay. And toward the end of his life, Masud Khan stopped wearing Western clothes and started embracing his Indian past and showing that to the West more and more. He wore clothes that were different from Western clothes that he felt were closer to Eastern clothes. And this is an example of him with one of his lovers. Okay. This is British analyst. DWW ruined Masud. He kept no boundaries. He seduced Masud emotionally and intellectually. He wanted a marvelous son, and that's what he got. A lot of people in the West think that Winnicott, who was Masud's analyst gave analytic coverage for at least 15 years, that he did a bad job, that he took advantage of Masud Khan's extremely incredible English writing ability to edit and write in English. Harold Stewart's commenting on that. Okay. Masud Khan himself wrote Winnicott from envy and his need of me to help write was my most generous yet abominable exploiting accomplice. It's pretty negative about one of the greatest analysts of all time. Okay. This is Masud Khan died a terrible death in the in the West, in London. He he died of alcoholism. He grew up in India where there never was alcohol in his world. But when he came to the West, his Russian wife, Svetlana Beryosova, the dancer, became an alcoholic, and then he became an alcoholic, and he died after about 10 years of heavy drinking. He died of cirrhosis of the liver. Terrible. He looks pretty bad there. And there should be another one, right? Next one. This is again going to give you a sense of how his craziness actually, or I don't know what word to use, his problems. There are days when everyone has the feeling of a thing for me. That's an incredible quote when you think about it. I have learned to cope with others at the awesome price of alienating me from myself. And the idea here that I have, and others have too, is that his Eastern self was never part of his Western self. He kept them separate, and it made him never really fit in the West, as if the West would have ever let him fit in. Okay. And here again, a picture of him that I really like with a cigarette. And Dwayne, do you have that photograph?
Uh,
Oh, here. Yeah.
when
I
it,
should do. I should do the next quote, the quote from Christopher Bolus. Christopher Bolus, do you know him? He's the most successful psychoanalytic writer in the West now for at least 10 years. He was analyzed by Masud Khan. He wrote this: if mental illness can be forgiven, then the literary works of one of the most gifted analysts of this century may yet survive his tragically driven effort to dismantle himself before his death, because he's commenting on how Masud Khan did things that caused him to lose his reputation just before he died in the West, so that he died in disrepute in the West, even though he'd had a brilliant, brilliant career. And Christopher Bolus is saying, can we forget about his problems and just look to his writings? And if you just look to his writings, if you haven't read them yet, you are very lucky, because they're some of the best clinical writing in psychoanalysis ever written. It's like you can't put down his stuff. You just want to keep reading. He's a wonderful writer, as is Bolus, actually. Okay. This is a picture so I got access to Masud Khan's diary, and I'm publishing it in 3 pieces. I've published the first third. The second third is going to come out this year, and I think I'm going to put this on the cover of it because I love this photo. I think this captures what I'm trying to portray today, that here you have, he's Masud Khan on the right, just sitting in a train station, 2 very ordinary British people on the left. So Masud Khan's just sitting there reading a book or whatever he's doing, and they're staring at him because he looks different. He's different. Masud Khan never fit in. And that's why I love this picture. It captures, he was different. Okay, so now we can go put me on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
See, to me, it looks like you can't see me, but maybe you can. You can, Dwayne?
Yes, yes, we can see you.
Okay, good. Okay, so I don't have anywhere nearly enough time. What I just want to say something about the East, about what I know. I started my research on Masud Khan because I had studied Islam and the Arabic language in college, and then for a year in graduate school before I became a psychologist. So I was interested in the Islamic world. And when I studied psychoanalysis, I gravitated to reading Masud Khan, and I loved what he wrote. He was so great, but nobody was teaching it in the United States, and I couldn't understand why nobody, was, signing his papers in the training. And I did come to understand that, but um, I decided I was going to find out who he was, and I started doing research, and then I got so much information. I decided to talk in person to everybody I could find who had known him. And I did a lot of travel. Mostly it was to London and to Paris because he was a figure in France. And I'm telling you, people had strong feelings about him. He'd been dead for about 7 or 8 years, but quite a few men, and this is amazing, quite a few men cried when they talked about him. The women tended to adore him because he was a charmer. And this is your guy. This is your Pakistani guy in the West. And what happened with him was he came to the West. He learned about psychoanalysis. He mastered psychoanalysis. He really, really knew psychoanalysis. He was widely accepted because of all he knew. The West knew almost nothing about him as an Eastern presence, almost nothing. They didn't know about his childhood, his background. They knew he came from India that became Pakistan, but they didn't know more than that. So we really failed to understand him. And it's a tragedy. This is why you all ought to do some research. And like I wrote a book that's been pretty successful. That's a biography of him called False Self, The Life of Masud Khan. One of you could write a book the life of Masud Khan from the Eastern perspective, and fill it would fill out the picture. And I wish somebody would. I hope you email me. And if there's anybody who wants to write about him, I'll share anything with you if you just email me. That would help you to do it. So let's see, what do I want to say? He was born in um, Jhelum, which is where his mother was from, but he lived his childhood in Montgomery, which I think is now called Sahiwal. And then he lived his young adult life, young teenage years in Lyallpur, which used to be called Faisalabad, or is it the other way around? See, that's how little I know. But you probably know what I'm talking about. And his family, the father and the four wives, the 12 siblings, um, th- um, they grew up in enormous wealth because when India was conquered in the 1800s, the father and his brother sided with the British, and the British won, and they gave a lot of land and a lot of money to the father. So the family had wealth that was just extreme in a country that I think this is correct to say is one of the poorest countries in the world, or was then. And Masud Khan was the youngest son, but for whatever reason, he was favored by the father and he inherited, and I think this goes against your Islamic law, he inherited the estate and most of the money before his brothers. So that was striking. And when he came to, and the family, no, there's one other thing I want to say. So he went to the University of Punjab and he got a master's degree in English. What he really liked was English, particularly James Joyce.
Mm.
He um, he was started dating a Hindu girl, and he was half in love with this Hindu girl. And the family, both families, broke it up. He had a nervous breakdown of his own there. When he was in his late teens, and he went into psychoanalysis in Lahore. Which is amazing that there was a psychoanalyst there who saw him. So in 1946, he was 22. The family was worried about him. I I would guess, although no one confirmed this to me, because of the partition being about to happen, that they wanted to protect him, I would guess. So in 1946, through their British connections, he was put on the first boat that left for England after the partition, and he arrived in London. And he was going to go to Oxford and study English, but by a mistake he went to see a psychoanalyst for treatment, and they thought he was applying to be a they thought he was applying to be a student of psychoanalysis, so they took him into the program, and he stayed. He 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 was the youngest person to ever get accepted by the British Psychoanalytic Society to do training. And he had absolutely no background. He had never worked in the mental health fields, but they took him. I mean, it was a good choice because he was really gifted, but he was young. He was in his 20s when he became a training analyst, and he was good. Um, he he had a lot of money. He got he said, I don't know if this is true or not because he tended to be something of a liar. He said, or exaggerator, that he was driven around in a Rolls Royce and that he lived at the Savoy Hotel in an ancestral suite, whatever that is. But anyway, so he died of alcoholism um, without ever being understood, and it's he is the most interesting analyst you will ever come across. Consider consider doing some research on him, please, and write to me about it. And Dwayne, thank you so much for inviting me to speak here.
Thank you, Linda. Uh,
It's,
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I will be thanking you in person, though you won't be there when I do so. But I thought if it's okay with you, maybe we can spend another 10 minutes into the Q&A. We can take that for ourselves now, and maybe I could ask you a couple of questions if you're open to it.
fine. Yeah, sure.
I have so many questions, I don't know where to begin. Uh, uh, this presentation was a catalyst. Uh, my first question, I think the one that I'm most interested in is, do you know, you said that Masud Khan went into analysis in Lahore before he left Pakistan. Do we know who his analyst was? What were the circumstances that brought him into that analysis?
Well,
Um,
because of the breakup with that woman, the Hindu woman, was
yes,
why.
but I
But that we
suppose
do know the
my,
name.
my, my
Yes,
question though is why analysis? Why not something else?
I don't know. But the analyst, it's in my book. I think his name was Painter, but it's in my book, the name of his analyst. And that analyst had been trained by the British in London. So you had an analyst there. I mean, I know you guys are thinking of writing about psychoanalysis in Pakistan. He was an analyst there.
Hmm. He was a British person, not a
No, no, he was
oh
Indian. Well, no, wait, no. Actually, I don't know, but looking at his name, if his name is Painter, he's probably was British.
yeah. Oh, okay. Another question is that I've always been interested in why he was so interested in James Joyce. That's obviously a question that I personally find interesting because it was a preoccupation of Jacques Lacan's in the later part of his period
I
where
think you
Lacan
need,
dedicated.
I think you need to research that and write a paper on it. I
But
don't know. I'm not a expert on James Joyce. I don't even have a thought about it.
huh. I'm just thinking, we say so much about how Masad Khan has been misunderstood, and Joyce's work uh, is I don't know how to call it except for a big misunderstanding. Uh,
Really.
uh,
The authors who he lived with in the West, and they were his preoccupations all the time. The whole time he lived there are two ones that I do know, Shakespeare and Fyodor Dostoevsky, in particular, his book, The Idiot, which is about a man who comes from a foreign country and is a genius and is widely accepted, but not ever, no, I mean, is widely mm, adored, but never truly accepted, and disappears. Which I didn't get a chance to say actually that Masud Khan, when he died, he changed his will and gave nothing to his many friends in the West who he had told that he was going to give things to, and he had a lot of things to give. He gave everything to a Pakistani peasant, and that guy inherited a lot. He had to come to London to get it. So, because Masud Khan he felt like he returned to his Eastern roots as he was dying. They were more important to him and more basic to him than his Western life. So that matches The Idiot, I think, better than Ulysses, but you would know that better than me.
uh, what languages did Musad Khan know?
Yes, he knew five languages. I'm not going to be able to. You know that he knew French. He was prolific in English. He only wrote in English, and the other three are the ones that are most common for you. I don't know what they are. Urdu and Punjabi and whatever.
Okay. I have a maybe just a final question about Musad Khan and then a personal question for you. Um, it seems like he had a peculiar interest in clothing from be
In clothing?
in clothing uh,
Yeah.
from beginning to end. I noticed the early photos of him. He was very well dressed. He had the notch lapels,
Yes,
um,
yes,
which showed his wealth, I'm sure, and the wealth of his
definitely.
family. And then you see his love of clothing seems to be threaded throughout his life history, though the clothing changes.
That's
Uh,
right.
Toward the end, I think we saw some photos where he was wearing more traditional clothing. I didn't see him wear anything like a shalwar kameez or anything like that in any of the photos, but
I don't know that he didn't buy those, but he wore robes at the end of his life, and that was definitely meant to make him more Eastern. And he even bought the robes sometimes from the women's department at Harrods. I
huh.
don't think it was that easy for him to buy Indian or Pakistani clothes in London. I don't know, he didn't, but he dressed like an Indian, and it was a statement. So with the very, very expensive Western clothing, he was saying, I'm an important guy in the West. And when he changed, he was saying, I don't care about the West.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see this relationship to clothing, and you said he even bought some of his clothing at women's in women's department stores, I think.
Sometimes he bought robes there because that's the only place you couldn't buy a man's robe in London, or maybe somewhere, but not, I don't know where. Anyway, he would go to Harrods, that department store.
Huh. Actually, maybe just one more question, if you allow it, about Masad Khan. I heard something about how was it his second wife went into analysis with Winnicott.
Yes. No, his first wife,
His first wife
the one who had the nervous breakdown.
was this?
That pretty woman who was a mouse in the Royal Ballet,
Yeah,
Jane Shore. She went in, she had 4 times a week analysis with Winnicott for like 6 or 7 years, and she was actually hospitalized. And she came out and had a real life. She got married again and did fine.
and it was after that Masad Khan got in touch with Winnicott himself, or was this
No,
at
he was seeing Winnicott at the time.
the same time?
He gave his spot. He was in full analysis with Winnicott, which was 5 times a week. He gave Winnicott his practice was full. So for Masud Khan temporarily gave his time to his wife, but then he got time back with Winnicott after a while. We don't know how long it was.
Fascinating.
Yes, it was
Uh,
a gift to give her his time.
it's a very Eastern style. Uh, we hear cases of I wouldn't say analysts, but perhaps therapists in Pakistan who you have a family therapist who sees the mother,
Oh,
the
really?
child, and so on. Uh,
That's less common here.
yeah. Uh, so maybe my final question is, you spent a very long time on this work, which is
Like
really
basically my whole career
and you've
was my
done incredible things. You have best-selling books, and I've seen interviews with you on YouTube. And I'm interested in why you think this work that you've been doing, uh, why you've been putting so much of your time into it.
I think the reason I did is, I mean, I'm less enamored of him now, but the thing is, this man was such a good writer and such a fascinating person, and his story was so amazing, and it unrolled as I went, that I just was really interested in him. Also, there's been a huge effort to dismiss him in the United States in particular, but also in London because of an anti-Semitic case that he published in his last book. And it just really annoys me because I don't believe that he was actually an anti-Semite. He didn't care about politics. He didn't grow up knowing Jews. I'm not sure that you can become so negative about somebody if you didn't grow up with them. But he wanted to express his, he didn't like it that the British analysts were putting limits on him. Like he wasn't supposed to be having sex with his patients, for example. He resented that. And they were mostly Jewish. So he attacked them. He attacked people in any way he could. He like this is the extreme of it. He criticized Norwegians because he said they looked like egg whites. I mean, that's ridiculous. He criticized fat people, women. He criticized all kinds of people. But when he criticized the Jews in the United States, it's a very psychoanalysis is a very Jewish profession. He was dropped. He was dropped. He is not taught. He's ignored. It less so now because there's kind of a renaissance of interest happening, a lot of interest happening in him right now. But he was dropped for that, and also in England, which happens to be one of the most anti-Semitic countries, or at that time at least, that there was. But they still dropped him for his anti-Semitism. A Muslim was not allowed to be anti-Semitic, I guess, but a Catholic or Protestant could be. I don't know. But so I've had to, I also had to fight to get my stuff published. There were a lot of attempts to stop me, mostly by Christopher Bollas. Christopher Bollas didn't want stuff published. I'm not sure why. But anyway, he lost. I did it.
You did. What?
Yeah. So he's your Pakistani guy. You know, he was not a citizen of Pakistan. He was not a citizen of England. He was not, he had no citizenship, but he's your Pakistani guy. You should look into this man. He's an amazing, amazing man.
Uh,
Mixed, not just good, also bad.
mhm. You mentioned some new books that are coming out from you and new works. Uh, Maybe you could repeat what those are and what the timeline
Just
might
a
be.
new, okay, so some people, this woman Eileen Phillipson in California is starting to write about him, and Candace Orcutt in New York is writing. There's more and more articles about Masud Khan coming out, and there might be an anthology of articles about him that's going to get put together. But for me, because I'm older, I'm not as into publishing now as I was, but I got access to his diary and it was long and it's long and it's good. So it couldn't be all in one volume. So it's in three volumes. One volume's come out. The next volume comes out this fall with Karnak Books. And the third volume will come out, I assume in 2026. I hope so. The diaries of Masud Khan read like a novel. I mean, they're so interesting. But the first one's interesting, and you could get it now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Linda.
The most interesting is the third.
Keep us uh, keep us anticipating it.
Have a wonderful conference, you all. I wish I was there. I really wish I was there. And your guy Dwayne, he's quite amazing. So,
Thank you so much, Linda.
yeah. Bye for now. Write me. Get that email address and write me.